The Visigoths have been shattered. In a matter of a handful of years, the once imposing Visigothic kingdom of Toulouse has been wiped off the map. But a Visigothic warrior named Don Pelayo swore to avenge the fallen and start a war that would last 800 years. Ladies and gentlemen, the Reconquest begins. The Moors had taken almost the entire peninsula, the entire Visigothic kingdom, except for the Narbonense, where there was a last Visigothic stronghold that refused to fall to Muslim power. However, this resistance would soon be crushed. Some of the Visigoths fled to the Narbonense, others to the Frankish kingdom, others to the north, hoping to have some degree of freedom among the Asturian and Cantabrian mountains, although the truth is that most simply assumed defeat and accepted the new Muslim power. I want to highlight before continuing that as a main source, I am going to use the books of Javier Esparza, who in turn obtained the information from the 3 chronicles of Alfonso III and the Arab chronicles Al-Andalus and Al-Makari. Let's continue. Pelayo was a member of Don Rodrigo's personal guard, who remember lost his life in the Battle of Guadalete. Here's the link to the video above. In fact, Pelayo was noble, of the lineage of the kings Recesvinto and Chindasvinto. He fought alongside his king against the Moors, and had to escape with a handful of warriors to the Asturian lands. Up there, a Muslim governor, Munuza, was installed, specifically in Gijón. Musa, governor of the entire peninsula, did not act with mercy towards the Christians, and dedicated himself to looting lands and cities and, above all, to destroying churches. His intention was to dominate the Christians through fear, so that they would pay their tributes without complaining. He also demanded hostages from the main Visigothic families, and these were sent to Córdoba. Among these hostages was Don Pelayo. It seems that the real reason why Pelayo was specifically sent to Córdoba was so that Munuza could marry the Christian sister. Upon finding out, Pelayo escaped from the city and hurried back to Asturias. His rebellious soul had taken hold of him. Shortly after, Musa is accused of theft and corruption by Tariq, his general, and is executed in Damascus. For a few decades, there will be a dance of names among the Muslims due to internal disputes. And since it doesn't have much importance for the history of the Kingdom of Asturias. Right now, who leads the Muslims, I'm not going to name them all. In the year 718, Pelayo was elected king of the Asturians. The title is more testimonial than anything else, because he really doesn't have any kingdom. They are a handful of rebels living in the mountains. Little by little, his group was growing, as warriors from all over the northern mountain range began to join his revolt. The Christians began to launch attacks through guerrillas, in the pure style of Viriato. Here I leave you the link to the videos of Viriato. They attacked the Moors on the roads and in the fields, instilling fear in them, so that the Moorish parties were forced to be more numerous to avoid these attacks. In the year 721, a new governor arrived in Córdoba and Bassa, and decided to double the taxes on Christians and confiscate all the goods of the Jews. This last point is curious, as the Jews helped the Muslims to take various Visigothic places, and hailed them as liberators. Anbassa sent an expeditionary force under the command of Alcama to quell the rebellion. Of course, Don Pelayo's troops, which were troops in name only, could not face the Muslims in open field and took refuge in Covadonga. There Pelayo met a hermit who gave him a cross and told him that this would be the symbol of victory. Pelayo took the cross and made it the symbol of his rebellion, the symbol of the Kingdom of Asturias. His men positioned themselves on the edges of the roads on the hills flanking a gorge, ready to attack the Moors who crossed. The numbers of the Moorish forces do not exceed 10,000, but they could have been much less. Unfortunately, it is not known. The Christian troops would not amount to more than 100 or 200 men. So we have the Christians, poorly armed and hungry, trying to defend Covadonga from the Muslim troops, the best army of that time. As happens in these cases, the Muslims underestimated the rebels. They ventured into the mountains of Covadonga, through narrow passes flanked at all times by very steep slopes. They didn't know it, but above them were the Christians armed with bows and arrows. The Christians had carefully prepared the ambush. Ahead, they had blocked the road with logs and stones, so that the Moors would have to be busy removing the obstacles to continue. While in the rear, they had prepared half-cut trees and large rocks to be thrown and block the exit. The Moorish column reached the obstacles at the vanguard, and immediately the troops received orders to clear the path. The rest of the column began to get agitated. No soldier found it amusing to be in enemy territory in a gorge like that with the path blocked. That premonition was right. Pelayo launched his battle cry, and the Christians opened fire. Dozens and dozens of projectiles fell on the head of the enemy column. It could not retreat due to the large number of troops they had behind, which, not being attacked, did not understand what was happening. The Muslims reacted, took their own bows, and shot upwards. Big mistake. Most of the arrows bounced off the stones or simply missed their trajectory and went up into the sky. And of course, due to gravity, what goes up must come down. The arrows, due to the weight at the front, fell point first and added to the rain of projectiles that the Christians were launching. The Muslims, all of a sudden, were no longer facing dozens of arrows but hundreds of projectiles, and they thought they were being attacked by a very large army. The Muslims raised their shields, and the arrows began to lose their effectiveness. The Moorish archers took cover under the shields of their comrades, and the entire army formed a defensive layer over their heads. The vanguard advanced to the obstacles, and covered by the shields of their comrades, they tried to remove the logs and stones as quickly as possible. The idea was to get out of that gorge as soon as possible. The Christians then picked up large rocks and threw them over the edge against the Muslims. Thanks to gravity, these stones pulverized the enemy shields and crushed their bearers. The shields were of no use. Their only chance of survival was to escape from the trap. The Muslims lost morale, turned around, and began to push the troops that were coming from behind. It's not their downfall. The Christians began again to shoot arrows at the Muslims, now at their backs. In addition, Pelayo ordered to block the entrance of the distillery, so the witch of a Moorish woman could not escape either. It was a massacre. Arrows and rocks of all sizes were falling on the Muslims. They had to jump over obstacles, dropping their weapons and armor, and run to save their lives. A large number of Muslim officers died, which made a coherent escape even more impossible. And there's nothing sadder than a retreating army. The Moors, in panic, made their way through the rear blockade as best they could, and started running away from that ambush. The Christians had won the battle, but it wouldn't end there. Pelayo ordered that the survivors be harassed all the way back, decimating them. His intention was to inflict such a defeat on them that the invaders would think twice before attacking their lands again. Under constant attack, the Muslim army was retreating, leaving a trail of dead behind them. It was a constant trickle of casualties, and finally the Muslim army disintegrated. I note I have sweetened and adapted the battle to the narrative. It is not known how it was. According to the Muslims, it was a mere skirmish in which the Moors decided to leave because it was not worth fighting against those rebels. Literal words from the Muslim chronicles: there were barely 30 wild donkeys in Covadonga. According to the Christian chronicles, the Muslim army had 180,000 men, and God made their own arrows turn against them. Hence, I mentioned that many of the Muslim arrows, after being fired, fell back on themselves due to gravity. Each side gave their version, some praising the victory to unimaginable limits, and others suggesting that it was a mere unimportant skirmish. The Moors had been defeated for the first time, and the Christians had achieved their first victory. And it was this victory that legitimized Don Pelayo as king of the Kingdom of Asturias. The Muslim governor Munuza was forced to flee from the north after this defeat, and Pelayo settled in Cangas de Onís. It should be noted that what Pelayo has under his command is not a kingdom per se, but a group of populations and people of all kinds whose common cause is opposition to Islam. Yes, the Kingdom of Asturias has been born, but there is still a long way to go to become a kingdom like the typical medieval kingdom we all have in mind. The fact is that the Muslims abandoned that area and decided to focus on invading the Franks and at some point taking Rome, the icon of the West. The Kingdom of Asturias would have the opportunity to develop and forge alliances without Muslim harassment. The Muslims took over all of Narbonne, causing large colonies of Christian refugees to flee to present-day Toulouse, the former capital of the Visigothic kingdom. The Moors decided that they needed to keep pushing. They tried to conquer the south of present-day France but were defeated by Duke Odo of Aquitaine in the year 721 at the Battle of Toulouse. For now, the Muslim advance in Europe had been stopped, and what happened to the east of the Kingdom of Asturias? Well, we have the Basques who rose up in arms in 723, and the Aragonese who rose up in 724. It seems that the area of Alava and Carranza never fell into Muslim hands. It is true that Musa had defeated the Basques, but just as they rose up against the Visigoths continuously, it would not be different with the Muslims. To the west we have Galicia, which, unlike the Basques, has a much more established and extensive administrative structure, which caused its inhabitants to be governed by the new power in a much more controlled and efficient way, although, as we will see, Galicia will play a fundamental role during the Reconquest. The issue is that Galicia had been occupied by the Suevi for 2 centuries, so in some way they had a kind of feeling of unity among them, something that the Basques lacked, who were a group of mountain tribes. Mountainous. Unfortunately, little is known about the following years of the Kingdom of Asturias, but it is known about the great defeat that the Muslims suffered in their attempt to invade Gaul. The Battle of Tours or Poitiers would be etched in their memories. I plan to narrate this battle. I will leave it up here when it's ready. If you see that it's not here within 2 months, it means I've forgotten, and please, remind me in the comments. In the year 737, Don Pelayo died of natural causes and was succeeded by his son Fabula, the first heir to the Kingdom of Asturias. But unfortunately, 2 years later he died fighting a bear near Cangas de Onís. The new heir to the throne of Asturias inherited a kingdom and a goal: to reclaim the lands taken by the Moors. The old dream of Alaric to have a Gothic kingdom had transformed into having a Christian kingdom that encompassed the entire peninsula. This man will be the first of an extensive lineage, his name Alfonso III.